As for example this story, the famous story of the split foot that had to happen in a sermon on the side of the well. There was a man very upset against his mother. This mother no doubt that push him to the end by his shouts. Always is he that a furious day he gives him a big kick and he goes away from home is obviously something serious. The honor we owe to his mother is important, and this man always angry notify passing a church where there is a crowd that listens and he returns. He falls on a preaching of Antoine-Padoue. Antoine-Padoue is talking about the love of Christ, his sweetness of forgiveness coming out of his word. This man has upset by the word coming out of Antony's mouth decides to come home, and in tears he approaches his mother to ask forgiveness, but his mother, who is still under the kick she received, tell him, I certainly forgive you, but God him he does not, will never forgive for what you have done to me. Then this man as desperate decides by what he heard in the sermon fit foot and leads to sin. Couple, it is better to go crippled in the kingdom of heaven sooner than with his 2 feet well. He goes to the workshop, he seizes the ages while his mother is frightened. He cuts his foot, she is there completely clueless. In Padua, Antoine, who passes in the area, hears talk head story. He'll see this man and the roar in 10 years, but the word that is in the writing must be taken in the metaphorical sense, is a comparison that means that we must cut ourselves off from sin, and so he drew a sign of the cross on his foot and the healed by against. When they see the mother who had said to his son, God probably will not forgive you, he made him a reproach by telling him God and is more tender than a mother. If you his mother you knew how to forgive him, how much more God him forgive his pecpm. There will be dozens of miracles of this kind. For example, this story during a sermon, or a Jew named Karine Zachary of the villain call him, saying, your story of caristie I do not believe. It is not possible the presence of God in bread, but if ever my soul prostrate when you go out with your Eucharist, I will believe. Then Saint Antoine to answer him, bets, but know that if your soul does not prostrate it will come the moment of faith. Well, this because he decides to prepare in a solemn way and in front of everyone the bet. That means he says, this my ass I do not miss. 3 days when we will be in the crowd we will put a pile right hay and sailing, and on the left the Eucharist, and we will see who will find my bubble. SSQ certainly accepts Antoine and obviously arrives the day of Paris. The whole city was warned have, but as we said, oats and hay to write, and Saint Antoine is rock with the Eucharist in a monstrance, and that makes the bubble when you have senses. And well, not only does it not even look at the lavoine, but it rushes to the holy sacrament and it prostrate, eyes fixed on, I would say, the monstrance. At this sight Zachary lui even prostrate, he immediately asks to become a Christian. Obviously, how could it be otherwise? He knows well who has not had any special effects. It's absolutely upsetting. This miracle must have happened to Bourges, because there is a church in Bourges which is called Saint Pierre the Villain, so no doubt that Zachary has changed his name to take a non-Christian, and on which there is the representation in engraving of a mule who prostrate themselves before the Holy Sacrament. Obviously the noises of these miracles spreads throughout Christendom, and when there will be a council exactly on November 30th, 225, which will meet at Bourges around the cardinal fontanges, papal legate with 6 archbishop without bishop turn the abbots and prior of France and Navarre, to who will be called to do the preaching during this council is obviously the minor brother to Antoine de Padoue. He will do it, he will, and he is 30 years old, simply 30 years old. Then one may wonder what he looked like. In fact, one imagines a very dry Franciscan, very thin because of the privations. Actually Saint Antoine de Padoue, as Saint Thomas d'Aquin and Papin Diderot country, it wants to say that he has an illness that causes him to retain water and his body is swollen. It seems big, he seems obese, when in fact he is just sick. The brothers know he is an ascetic, but despite all it has this physics there, so it is not necessary to be represented as on the statutes. Arrives Indiana 12126, the general chapter of the Franciscans of the Friars Minor. Saint-François de Assise does not go there. It was marked by all sorts of proofs, a kind of night of the mind. We can say that we own his own foundation disappointed him, because the directors, I would say the superiors, decided that it still needed buildings for the brothers to study, while he just had the intuition that it was necessary to possess nothing. It was necessary that the community was poor, so François was reached by a stripping of his charisma, and the Christ appeared to him in the form Of an angel he was marked by the stigmata, so he cannot move, he is very sick and already his spirit is probably in heaven always. Is it that Antoine surrendered general chapter and he is in charge of preaching? Who could be if not chose him as the theme? Precisely the Passion of Christ, the spiritual union to the Passion of Christ, and his sermon upsets the brothers. They hear and all of a sudden they stop, they staring at the ceiling. What's going on? The brothers do not see anything. Well, we'll know later. Antoine, French voice s of sitting, who is there in the form of spirit and who hovers gigantic above the assembly with its stigmata and who seems to bless it, so we can say that the poor little seated he could not come in the general chapter went in spirit, and who has blessed his brothers is already something that is from heaven to the general chapter. Brother Antoine is appointed guardian of the city of Limoges, to say brothers minor who have settled in this city, and he goes there, he goes as he can with his illness, and there they crunch, begins to preach and people listen to him. They rush to the churches. Sometimes he has to do 2 sermons, and well, it is the following miracle. He is in a church, he makes his sermon and all of a sudden he folds back on himself, he concentrates, and in the other church where he must take his oath he is seen taking his oath, then he continues where he was not returned, so he has the gift of bi-rental. It is attested by the people of his day. It would be necessary to study how they were doing. It was his spirit that went away, is what his body was in 2 places. In any case they seemed to be able to preach when one place at a time from where the interruption in his preaching, and without CSE I would say marked by little if we ourselves great miracles of this kind, for example very delicate things. One day when he preaches in front of a huge crowd who came to hear him while he is on a platform, here a storm is approaching, a terrible storm, the clouds are black and the rain begins to fall, people are going to disperse. It says stay, rest, and you will see you will not be wet. Actually it's raining, it's pouring rain, but is protected by a sort of dome, and well, the crowd does not receive water and therefore listening, it listens to the end of the preaching of Saint Anthony. This link with nature is something that is typically Franciscan. We have already seen his ends in France. May 20th 6th that anoine will multiply to the extreme. I would like to tell one of the best known miracles, because typically he marks who is Saint-Antoine-de-Padoue. It happens at Castle Forest near Limoges. Antoine received hospitality from a lord, and he has his little room for him for the night. As for the seniors, he is very curious, and so they roam the halls, and he sees a huge light shining from under the door, or golden. Brother Antoine, so he goes there, he looks discreetly, and what are they seeing? And well, away Brother Antoine in the room that is standing, that has in his hands the text of the Gospel, and on the text of the Gospel a beautiful children with eyes full of light that illuminates the room, and that they will bring them will be reported in the annals of the life of his aunt Saint Antoine. We can say that why this miracle is it so known, because it really reveals what was the preaching Saint Antoine. He knew how to get out of writing Jesus living as he was, he knew how to make alive his love for Jesus was so good to express that that's what people felt, and then he accompanied little miracles that even people with small concerns had to deal with when they preached. For example, once they passed the door of a person who lament because his big can containing wine barrel quest in the cellar fled during the night, and all the wine was poured out by Father him. He goes there, he draws a blessing, and the wine goes back into the barrel. It sounds like nothing but these gestures of delicacy that touched people, and that in fact of it among the people one of the most popular saints in the world. It remains in their case investigation in pursuit of object, the precious object, seeking to know the absolute life, absolutely give to Christ, and so it happens to him. He withdraw to a cave to pray, to be further from the crowd. That means that the preaching honors which he is obviously filled are nothing compared to his love for Christ. Must not believe that Saint Anthony even at this time is perfect. On the contrary, it is like us, it is tempted. An anecdote, a day when it is particularly tempting. On what temptation we do not know. Was it the temptation to leave as a martyr somewhere in Morocco and to leave his preaching? Were you tempted to become a hermit? Was it a temptation simply human, perhaps impure thoughts? Always is he that very tempted. He invokes the Holy Virgin so that it comes to his aid, because he knows that he is fragile, and the Holy Virgin appears to him. She carries the child Jesus, she is surrounded by angels, and she blesses him, and immediately the temptation of course disappears with Satan, who flees, it is said. But see, just a little letters, so tempted, and maybe even I would say temptations similar to Saint Anthony of the desert, and quite simply for humility, as a Jesus tells him to Saint Paul, its splinter in his flesh I left them, because my grace suffices for you. To speak of the immensity of the graces you have received for fear that you fall asleep. But his Holy Virgin care for the holiness of her servant who is charismatic. On May 30th, 12127, then that Antoine at 32 years old there is again a general chapter of the brothers and he is named prior could say like that before Bologna tell the place where they had already taught and he goes there simply he goes there to be able to give new the teaching the brothers are subjugated by his teaching it is good that he will receive the bar the title 2 arches alive in the holy writing obviously again it is necessary to take care of what is priority to know the heretics because the Heres Cathar, however, who was dead she is reborn from these centers very strongly from his departure and we can say that we must return then he goes only the Cathars this time have received instructions even firmer do not listen to the preachings of this man there if you do not follow them, he goes to a place where there are fishermen, of course, who are not able to escape him. Then he goes near the water and he begins to preach while prepare their nets he says since you do not want to listen to the word of God the fish eggs will listen to him and now the fish begin to get their head out of the water with the small fry and further the big fish and everything the world is there in circles that costs who listens to the preaching of Saint Antoine and the sailors are there who obviously stops to look at their son one who looks at this absolutely fabulous miracle obviously. Before that there will be a lot of conversion back to Christianity he is a fisherman speaks about it all is known throughout the region this story is reported so far it is attested by manuscripts of the time still is it that Qatar leaders furious of such success will say that the sailors were able to dream they dreamed they did not see anything it was an illusion they say that such a man so dangerous well we have to get rid of them and so one day they invite the case leaders speak invite for a meal and a theological discussion of course Brother Antoine sire ans how to miss such an occasion however they have planned a ambush and this trap is a dish poisoned and he presents it to Antoine and Antoine goes account I would say divinely warned he said I will not eat this dish you have prepared something for my weight zones is and others to tell him but you have faith in Christ Christ said whoever will eat poison that will make me the so a bad one eats of so and Saint Antoine who is trapped there finally but he answers okay I would eat no problem but I do it to save your weapons know that I do not do it to tempt God in these miracles then he goes to eat the dish and mans to the end and they feast and they are there watching they wait for the first signs of choking stomach ache etc and nothing of this product is in 1229 when he is 34 years old that the city of Padua will enter his life why does it choose because in fact it is a city where there are many students who are waiting for his preaching and so he chooses to go to them to give them teaching and then there is a convent of poor Clares and one of them called Helene Anselmini will be like a spiritual sister a little bit like Saint Clare for Saint Francis of Assisi she will be in deep communion with him and that is something that is common among the great saints to know there is a female pole that will balance their lives and bring them closer to heaven and thus surrounded by spiritual presence on earth that will happen the last year from Saint Antoine to Padoue it is to Padoue precisely that it is for this last year and it is there that it will be buried hence its name of Saint Antoine of Padoue it is not old there is 35 years old but made at that time when we give ourselves fully new very quickly it is a period too that is very difficult it is the great period the famous war between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines it means these two factions who in Italy then all over Europe will fight one being for the supremacy of the Pope who is to be able to name according to them the Emperor of the worsened Roman of Occident of West and the other which is rather for the supremacy of the Emperor Saint Antoine is caught in this extremely cruel period because the war we did as we should do at that time with great savagery it is there it does not interfere with politics but when it can intervene to put a little bit of humanity in this war. It does it VAA going to be besides all the work of the Church trying to do that there is less deaths less looting, savagery here is an anecdote that is typical of the action not only of the Church but also of Saint Antoine of Padoue at this period there is on the occasion of this war of the Lords but also bandits who take the possibility of enriching himself enormously and in particular a famous man the famous Nero of the Middle Ages called Ainsley or Enzolino we can say it's a gong. bandits' highway, and on the occasion of this war he claimed the Ghibelline camp, so rather for the emperor he took hostage a man the Lord but also a teenager, and he will return them only this ransom, and we know that if we do not pay he actually performs. They simply practice the taking of hostages. The inhabitants of Padua do not know what to do, and while Antoine is going, he was going to devote himself to go to him to try with all the force his word to touch his heart is an extremely risky embassy. This noble and unscrupulous, he has already killed many churchmen on a single stroke, so he is capricious, and while he goes there he finds himself with him. He begins to talk to him very frankly. He blames him for his cruelty, they reproach him for his crimes. He asks him to release these prisoners, and the other there who makes fun of him, who says he wants to pull out his sword to pierce him from side to side, but who restrains himself and who finally yields nothing but lets him leave. The people of onlookers obviously are happy like all to see their Ines who comes back, but he did not win anything. He did not bring back the hostages. The people are happy, Padua Antoine and unhappy. He realizes the limit on some hearts, the most tender say the most, you would say the strongest, coming from God. And well, this story, which could seem anecdotal, will mark it deeply. It is a little bit, I would say, the last act of his life. He asks to be relieved of his role of superior of his convent. He wants to devote himself again to the essential, to know the teaching, the book, writing, the prayer, the contemplation, and well, it is raised not only because we see how much it was marked by this embassy, it will be drawn sometime in the contemplation. His quest is the Lord, and it is the love of the neighbor for all to go to heaven. He does not stay slow quiet amount. He is called to preach, obviously how to do without his word. Well, they accept, they start to preach, and crowds hurry to hear his sermons. He uses political events. One could say that globally it's like he spoke in 40 years, 10 years intel and collaborators. Another is resistant. You're all sons of the same God is there. He talks Gibelin since the city of Padua and Bourges. Guelph, he says it's Gibelin, they are our next. He was tagged, I say them, because Nero of the Middle Ages, he saw how money could corrupt hearts. So we have a few sentences of one of his sermons he pronounces at that time, and that concerns precisely the risk of money. He says this about the sums of money: their teeth are like that of the lions, their breath in plague, because they only eat the money, mud and manure of gain. There are among you peepholes who would sell their souls and that of others for 30 deniers. The devil is a evil, a hunter, they slaughter them. Ha ha, great blow of his everlasting axe, unless he do not restitute and do not assent. Penance is a strong speech, a speech whose tone will be found, for example, in the Pope Jean Paul II, in the French Pope, when they go to the mafia to Palermo, and they will talk about the risk of hell for those who, in the name of money or not of a gain, while claiming to be disciples of Christ, kill, plunder, steal. Obviously the words are hard. Then from time to time they stop to remake appeal in his sermon, and he invokes the Virgin Mary's the sea, the one who is sweet and who also loves. These bandits have not for the moment the rabbit but the ram, obviously, and the effects on the hearts are fantastic. People kneel. People promise to make also that they stole the usurers. It is a terrible evil of that time, that is to say those who make loans with an interest so strong that the poor do not go out and well repent, make money what they stole too much. We promise, we take a law on the predication of Saint Anthony of Padua, we take a law to no longer lock up for life those who have debts is something that is important. It is a great advance that his love of God gives the city of Padua at this time. It is even said that 12 bandits decided to come down, their curiosity disguised as civilians, to hear the sermons of Saint Anthony. They come back upset. He decides to leave their job. Bandits, it changes lives. Of course all these spiritual fruits do not lack. Unleash the violence of the tea, my lover, in the name of love or not of humility. Can he get so much? And so he is very much attacked by temptations, by desires to flee, to be inherited from, cease to preach, to put to his dear contemplation. But it is all this only the love of the neighbor, this equivalent to the love of God at a given moment. All the same, exhausted, they ask to be able to retire a certain time in a soli study, and that stick very much later. Someone like Saint Vincent de Paul will explain assessors. He will say you cannot find the Christ in the poor and in your brothers before having long sought the Christ for him. Even then he retires, and there is a Lord who accompany him. Abandoned they travel, they are on his piers. He falls in admiration before a huge drowned in the branches form a kind of bowl like that and goes up to heaven. He helped to Lord, this is where I have to stop, I'm going to do my hermitage. The sweat drown and the Lord tells him, brother Antoine, quite, and I'm going to leave me your hermitage, I'll do with boards, I will, you deserve it, or given so much of your life. So this little brother will retreat to his tree, perched a bit like a brown bird, I would say, on his rent. He will remain unknown for a while, but soon we will end up wondering who is he. Hermit is on his tree, and we will know that his brothers Antoine. Then peasants will come asking, begging, who gives them a few minutes of teaching that tells them about Christ, and he obviously will do it. How to be otherwise? I tell him once that we found the Christ, the commandment of the love of the neighbor is the same, and it is there on his tree that will have the discomfort that will probably take his life. We find it one morning, he fell from his tree, he is on the ground, he is unconscious. We rush, everyone is maddened, we warn the brothers who come, he breathes, it is put on a stretcher and we must transport it. Will we transport it to the city of Padua? We hesitate, he will not survive, it is a trip too long, but there is a small convent with poor Clares not very far, so we decide to bring them, and they are happy to collect, but at the same time it is so sick, so much weak, and Antoine and L2, he is on a straw mattress, he is weak, and he invokes the Virgin Mary. He is calm and peaceful, he is given absolution, he is given extreme unction, and it is written when he receives it, really I feel in me such sweetness, such an option, I do not think I need this sacrament, but it's a good thing, I like it a lot, give it to me. And meekly it's time the arms to receive the various anointings on the hands, on the bottom, etc. And then he receives the viaticum, that means the sacrament of the Eucharist, the one given for the journey, because it is believed that he will not stay alive long and give up while he is like that on his bench. That around they are the little ones they look at, and well, his face lights up. A brother leans towards him, what do you see, my brother? And he simply answers, my Lord. And that's how peacefully on June 13th, but 231 to 36 years old, brother Antoine of Padua flies to the other world. The news spreads in the whole region, everywhere we welcome, and especially at this time when it is so important to have relics, i.e. memories from the drawing body, that we can be touched, is closer, because approaching a saint who we know is the case of Antony, we are approaching heaven, we think so. So there is such a demand for relics, too great, full of people are clamoring for his body to bury him there. The Padua city is the poor Clares, there is the suburb of Padua where he died. Some at night will try to attack the convent of poor Clares to force the door and to steal the body. Will be truly a riot, and it will take the intervention of the bishop to calm everyone, so he intervenes. Country said the funeral will be held in great pomp, Padua, in the cathedral, and it is normal. We have never seen in no water a funeral so grandiose, crowd so concentrated, if collected by all as soon as they are proud are lit, and the crowds rush, and that's where he is buried very quickly. People 20 times his tomb, and miracles began to multiply. They multiply pleases so much so quickly that the bishop is forced to contract Rome, saying he must open a survey. Foresee anonization, and the Pope accepts it. Is a record that will be beaten with Saint-Antoine-de-Padoue a year after his death. It is recommended, but how could it be otherwise? Vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people, obviously to speak the miracles of Saint Antoine of the Great, but also of the little ones. Who has not been confronted with a found object which did not find that by invoking Saint Antoine, sometimes really in an incredible way, one finds it, the miracles to multiply so strongly in the people as well in Italy as in France, that his name will spread everywhere. The statutes of Saint Antoine, obviously not with his real physics, which was a little bit the dishydrophysical, but with physics of a small Franciscans in brown, will spread throughout Europe and can be told hundreds and thousands of miracles. They are due to his intercession. He is given to everyone he intercedes for. I would like to tell a few. Our example for this little Franciscan brother Cambus, a poor brother suffering from a disease so humiliating, had 2 hernias, a hernia in the wind that unfortunately his intestines so he cannot hold them, hiding under his bureau. This sickness so disabling it goes through bado, and I would say it is there all sad or unhappy. We did not even wash the brothers when they sees that it is someone who suspected fainers. It is not possible otherwise. He did not even make his bed, his room and filthy. Obviously he's been blamed for it. He's telling the truth, he cannot do it. He cannot move because of that murdy. So the brothers tell him, but we have at home the best healers, the best doctors, we must go to Saint Antoine, and it is precisely the feast in honor of the saint who will be celebrated the next day. And the little brother, there go they pray, and the miracle occurs. Not only the hernia closes, but it forms a skin, so hard skin that he is there. He is so happy, it changes all his life. He begins to dance, dancing near the tomb of Saint Padua's Ananya. Miracles continue to occur until our times. I believe that the greatest of miracles, beyond these small objects that can be lost and can be found at his intercession, is to ask for the most lost object in our most lost time in Europe, and it is source of much anxiety that Antoine has really sought all his life, is to see Christ finally touching his hands, to be with all his brothers in heaven. The object, the PL, we are now lost in the West. It is the theological hope even among Christians, certainty and thirst that are real. Life is on the other side. Saint Antoine-de-Padoue until his death was able to see Christ and to show his brethren that luminous glance that occurs when Christ returns to his glory at the hour of death. Well, I believe that if there is one object found that we must ask for Europe, is that she regains the theological hope to be delivered this terrible disease that he is currently learning in the stomach like a hernia, this anguish which we refuse to know where it comes from, but it simply comes from the lack of God.